Welcome to Women's Sports Weekly, where women's sports happen every day, but we talk about it once a week. I'm Carolyn.
And I'm Danielle. Women's Sports Weekly is a podcast where we discuss the latest news, explore interesting stories, and share our love for women's sports. Follow us on Instagram, YouTube, and TikTok at Women's Sports Weekly Pod. Follow us and rate us on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Send us an email at womensportsweeklypod@gmail.com and we may feature your email on the podcast. Quickly, we always say we want people to follow and subscribe, especially on the podcast platform, Spotify and Apple. That really helps people find us, and we want to share the wealth. So if you can help us out, that would be great. Another exciting thing happened this past week. We hit 1,000 followers on TikTok.
Woo, tiny wins.
Tiny wins. We still have not hit the 1,000 mark on Instagram. So if you're listening and you don't follow us on Instagram yet, please follow us at Women's Sports Weekly Pod. It just helps other people find us, helps our clips go around, and we just want to continue to grow. So we really appreciate all our followers. Thank you. And we're really excited about hitting the 1,000 mark on TikTok.
Yeah, and we're not just collecting followers for fun. It's not to boost our ego. Followers actually help us with things like potential sponsorships. And I know that some listeners have asked for merch. That would also help with that. So following, sharing, it does help us grow in a way that we can provide more to you all. So we're not just doing it so that we can say we have more followers. We're doing it because we want to expand and grow and continue to offer our listeners something really, really great.
Yes. So very exciting. Other than that, how is your week going?
What a loaded question. We did like a mental health check-in a few weeks ago, and I had shared that my mental health could be better, and I'm taking care of myself. I want everyone to know that I'm doing what I need to do, and it's still difficult. Would you say that your mental health is okay during this time?
No, I mean, personally, work, just the way things are right now in our country and in the world, I think it's weighing heavy on a lot of people, including myself.
What I'm finding to be important is to really slow down and kind of look at how I'm doing things and if they're working for me. For example, I'm really into CrossFit and I've loved it for many, many years. And lately it's just been feeling like way too much. My body is asking me to slow down. I'm starting to look at things, and especially in my relationship with fitness, and saying, okay, what are some things that I can do to take care of myself that may look different than they have in the past? I think especially during this time, if things are feeling tough or things are feeling really difficult, I've found that being in community has been extremely helpful. For example, we joined a dodgeball league on Tuesday nights, and it is funny and it is light and it is the highlight of my week.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. And to your point about community, it is a queer dodgeball league in Denver. Getting to meet other queer people that we haven't met before and being surrounded by them really does help enhance the week, to just know we're not alone.
Yes.
And I know this time is weighing down a lot on the queer community and other communities. It's not just us. We're just part of that community. So it hits home for us. So I agree, being part of that is so important.
Yeah. And it's not like we're going to the league and talking about the state of the world. Like, we're going to the league and just being in community with other people who have similar experiences, different experiences, and it just feels nice. That has been really helpful. On top of that, I do go to therapy, and I just need to continue to go at this point. And I've said before, I'm never going to graduate from therapy. I go in, I come out, I go in, I come out. But during this time especially, it's been really, really helpful for me to continue to take care of myself. And every day is not great, and some days are better than others, but I just have to do what I need to do in order to know that I'm taking the steps to take care of myself, because when I don't do those things, I can get really doomy and gloomy.
Yeah, we're pretty big advocates of therapy. It is helpful, even if you think you have nothing to talk about. When you get into the session, it's like, oh, I actually have a lot to talk about. We're not doctors, but if you're on the fence about going to therapy and you're afraid of the stigma around it, we always like to promote it in a positive light, because it's been helpful to both of us.
Yeah. And it's a privilege to be able to go.
Yes.
there's also that piece too.
With everything going on in the world that's negative, it is nice to get an escape through sports. A lot of fun things going on this week that I'm excited to talk about today. Yeah, let's get into it.
Well, we're not starting with a good one. Do you know that? Sorry. We have a little bit more doom and gloom in this episode before we get into
I apologize. I don't mean to be insensitive to what we're about to talk about. I'm just thinking about the outlet, but unfortunately, there have been things passed that actually hurt people in the community, especially women's sports. So yes, this is not a fun topic that we'll talk about right now.
We've said on this podcast before, we don't get partisan, and I want to stick to that. However, unfortunately or fortunately, I don't know how you want to look at it, I do love the activism within women's sports, but women's sports is inherently political because there are many structures in place, many systems in place that make it so. And there's a lot of inequity. We, I think, have an obligation, and it's actually very important to me to shine light on not just the great things that are happening in women's sports, but also the things that really suck.
Yeah, it's part of our duty, I would say, in having this podcast. Like, we need to share what's going on that's negatively impacting certain populations. So I definitely agree that's important.
Yes. And you said certain populations, but I really do think that anything that impacts a marginalized community impacts everyone.
So how I should reframe that is it's targeting certain communities and the impact is on the entire community. So thank you for making that distinction, because that is an important one. And that's what I meant, but words matter and how I frame it matters. So I appreciate you calling me out on that.
All right, let's get into it. The NCAA changed its participation policy for transgender athletes last Thursday, limiting competition in women's sports to athletes assigned female at birth only. There's over 500,000 athletes participating in NCAA level sports, and it's also estimated that there are only 10 transgender people in the NCAA.
And just to make that very clear, not 10%, 10 people out of over 500,000.
And not clear if they're trans men or trans women. This was in response to an executive order that bans transgender girls and women from competing on sports teams that match their gender identity. This is not just affecting the NCAA. This is affecting any institution that receives federal funding that has women's sports teams. Something to keep in mind. So not only is this affecting elite level, this is affecting young kids.
Yes. To that point, we talked about on episode 54 when we interviewed Frankie De La Creta the importance of sports in youth. You and I both played sports our whole lives, and I would say in many areas that helped me beyond words to form who I am today. Without sports, I really don't know where I would be right now. And now we're going to take that away from children at such a young level. It's just not right. I recommend that everyone listens to episode 54 in that interview to learn more from Frankie De La Creta, because it was very eye-opening. To me, it's a tragedy that we're doing this to kids.
Yeah. And follow Frankie. Follow people who are writing about this, who are shedding light on this, and may provide a different perspective than how you've thought about things before. What I think is interesting is they're using Title IX to enforce this rule, which is
literally the reverse of what Title IX stands for, but somehow they're going to use it.
Yes. And they're threatening to take away federal funds to institutions who violate. The other interesting piece is that the Department of Education is one of the institutions that actually enforces this. And there's been so much political talk about taking the Department of Education away, which has its irony on its own. I get so upset because I don't want to live in a world where we're so horrible to human beings. It just... And this is where I get doom and gloom. And this is what I talk about in therapy, of how to separate myself from like this bigger thing and not have it weigh me down so I can actually do action to it. But it's just like, wow, I can't believe we're just being so horrible to humans.
Yeah. And unfortunately, people create fear and they dehumanize transgender people, and that makes it okay in people's heads. You mentioned just trying to open your mind and get a different perspective. If you can take 10 steps back and look at these people and remind yourself they are people, I hope that can at least open someone's mind to maybe their current beliefs, because it's just not okay.
And they've been playing sports without incident. So that's the other piece here. But we can talk and we can complain, but let's actually talk about what would protect women and girls, because this decision was made in an effort, in quotes, to protect women. We know that these types of bans don't protect women. They actually put women more at risk, because if you're not feminine enough, if you're too good, your gender, your sex is going to be questioned.
And it's happened. There's been females assigned at birth who are really, really good at something and do get questioned if they're transgender or not. And yeah, that is so harmful to the entire community.
Exactly. So what would protect women and girls? I have some ideas. Addressing sexual assault and harassment, especially on college campuses and especially for college athletes, that would protect women and girls. We saw during March Madness last year the incredible amount of threats of violence on social media to women's basketball players, especially women's basketball players of color. So I think if we want to see laws and regulations, let's start there. Let's start with protecting college athletes who constantly receive threats, who have been victims of sexual assault at the hands of their coaches, at the hands of their trainers. And to this day, there is not enough to protect them. What else? We could address pay equity.
What a concept.
That would be great. That would protect women and girls just a bit more. If we could address the large disparity between pay when women have proved time and time again that they are marketable, that people watch, that would protect women and girls. We can actually hold universities accountable that violate Title IX. Back all the way in episode 16, we talked about Title IX, and we talked about how many universities were not actually in compliance and how many universities kind of buff up their numbers in order to say that they're in compliance. So they do things like counting the male practice players as female athletes to hit the quota. We could address those things in order to protect women and girls. Like I said before, I know that this is a really chaotic time and everyone is just trying to take care of themselves, and I'm trying to do the same thing. And what we've talked about is, with everything going on, choosing one area that we as individuals are going to focus on rather than spreading ourselves out way too thin. I think if you try to do everything, you're going to do nothing. And if you focus on one area, you can be productive in that area and other people can be productive in other areas. So that's what we're adopting. I would also love to see people who play in women's sports come forward and support trans inclusion in sports, because we're not really seeing that yet. And I know that there's fear, and I know that people are trying to take care of themselves. And like we said at the top of this, unfortunately, women's sports includes activism. Unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you want to look at it, includes getting political. And I think it would mean a lot and would send a clear message, not only to everyone in the nation, but also to trans folks who participate in sports, that we've got their back. With all that being said, February continues to be Black History Month, and we want to continue supporting Black nonprofits within the month of February. So can you tell us about the Black nonprofit we are supporting this week?
So this week we are supporting the Okra Project, and we ask our listeners to also consider donating. The Okra Project is a mutual aid collective focused on supporting Black trans people and alleviating the barriers the community faces. The Okra Project provides mental health resources and services specifically for Black trans people. We will post the link to donate in our show notes, similar to last week.
Awesome. Let's get into something lighter. Let's get into our highlight reel for this week.
This is the escape I was talking about earlier, the positive parts about sports. And yes, more news on the WNBA free agency. It just continues to surprise us.
After we released our episode last week, Sid Colson, WNBA sweetheart, played for the Las Vegas Aces, signed a 1-year deal with the Indiana Fever.
You love Sid Colson.
I do.
She is very funny, and she's also a very good player. The Fever just continue to rack up really good players.
Yep. She's a great role player, a great person to have in the locker room. I can't imagine not having Sid annoying Asia anymore.
I know. It is sad. That team's getting broken up so much.
So I wonder who it will be now. Is it going to be DeWanna Bonner? Is it going to be Caitlin Clark? Who is she going to annoy throughout the season? Because she has like little sister energy and great energy. And so I'm looking forward to see how that adapts The other thing that I'm going to miss is Asia Wilson. Every Pride always gets her prideful teammates a gift, a cake of some sort. And Asia Wilson is going to continue to do that, but Sid Colson won't be receiving those gifts anymore, which makes me sad.
Maybe Asia will send something in the mail.
Yeah. Or maybe someone else on the Indiana Fever team will give Sid her cake during Pride. She needs it.
I hope so. And then last week we talked about the Connecticut Sun losing all 5 starters. Well, it's no surprise that Marina Mabry has requested a trade from the Connecticut Sun.
I think she might be trying to make her way to Dallas, back to Dallas.
So I would love that. When her and Enrique Gumbawale graduated from Notre Dame, they were both on Dallas together. Those two are really, really good friends, and I would just love that duo back.
Yes, Enrique posted this past week that her and Jackie Young and Marina Mabry got together to watch the Notre Dame Stanford game, and just that she loved it, and it was like old times, and I was like, is she planting a little hint here of what's about to happen? So that's where I got the idea that she might be headed to Dallas.
Yeah, that'd be very exciting.
That is not confirmed. That is me making a lot of speculation. Alicia Clark, also from the Las Vegas Aces, is headed back to the Seattle Storm. And Tiffany Mitchell signed with the Las Vegas Aces. She played at South Carolina. She is now reuniting with Asia Wilson, which I think is really great. And then Tiffany Hayes signed with the Golden State Valkyries, and I am officially a Valkyries fan.
Well, good thing you already have a t-shirt to get you started.
Yes. Are you going to join me?
I don't know yet.
You can't make a decision.
I know. I can't tie to one team. My players are everywhere.
Danielle, you can't live like this.
I'm going to continue to live like this because now all these women are only signing 1-year deals. So I really can't commit to anyone till next year. So my saga continues.
Okay, fine. So that is WNBA free agency news as of now. More information will continue to come out. We'll continue to keep you updated. Another great way is to follow us on Instagram, because anytime any news is shared, we share it on our Instagram as well, at Women's Sports Weekly Pod.
Yes. With that, we're going to talk about NCAA gymnastics.
NCAA gymnastics is up and running. As an overview, gymnastics competes in meets, where each team participates in 10 to 12 competitions per season. And like other sports, they primarily play against their conference opponents. At the end of the season, the top 36 teams qualify for regionals, and then the top 2 teams from each regional advance to the nationals. In 2024, LSU won the national championship, led by Haley Bryant. She came back for a 5th year. She was the SEC Gymnast of the Year last year, but Oklahoma is currently ranked number 1. They are 10-0 this season. They beat LSU actually earlier this year, and they take on LSU again this Friday, February 14th at Baton Rouge, which is going to be a difficult place to win again, and that starts off at 7:45 p.m. Eastern Time. Last Friday, Oklahoma beat number 8 seeded Kentucky in an SEC matchup. They are just on a roll. Oklahoma's Faith Torres had the highest scores in both the floor and vault and won the all-around. If you're interested in watching Oklahoma, I would also keep my eyes on Oklahoma's Jordan Bowers, who is a 7-time NCAA All-American and the 2024 Big 12 Gymnast of the Year. So be sure to check out gymnastics. It is in full swing, and we have quite the matchup coming up this Friday.
Yes. Moving along to our deep dive this week. This deep dive has 2 parts to it. This past week, on Thursday, Tennessee women's basketball, number 19, beat number 5 UConn 80-76. I have a feeling not everyone will know about the longstanding rivalry between Tennessee and UConn because it's been so many years that this rivalry was so heated. I think we have to share more about what it was and why this game was so big. Now, the rivalry is no longer. There had been a drought, and we'll talk about the history of it.
I would say the rivalry is still there. They just didn't play for a while.
But it's not the same. Like, Paige Beckers was asked about it the past week, and she's like, her rivalry, and that started out in the early 2010s, is more Notre Dame. Like, these kids were so young when Tennessee and UConn were at the height when Pat Summitt was the coach. We have been talking about Tennessee so much, especially over the past couple of weeks, because we had said they're right there. They're like playing so well this year. So this was a huge win. Before getting into the game, let's talk about the rivalry between the 2 teams. This was Tennessee's first win over UConn since 2007. This rivalry over the years was referred to many different things. Quoting, the meanest rivalry in sport, the greatest rivalry in women's team sports, and the best rivalry in women's basketball. These two teams met for the first time on Martin Luther King Day back in 1995. So these two teams are out of conference. This was the first time they decided to play out of conference games, and UConn won in their first matchup.
Were Gino and Pat the coaches during that time?
Yes. Gino Auriemma, UConn, and Pat Summitt for Tennessee were the coaches at the time. At that time in 1995, these were the two top teams in the country. The Associated Press, who releases the rankings each week, held off on that week until after that game to see who they would put as number one.
Love that.
UConn ended up winning. That same year, UConn saw Tennessee again in the national title, and UConn beat them again. The following season, they continue to play in the regular season. UConn beats Tennessee, and then during the NCAA tournament, Tennessee took their first win of the series, beating UConn in the Elite Eight. This rivalry between the two teams really started between Pat and Gino, because Gino, in the media, he always digs at certain teams or at certain coaches. There's been digs at Muffet McGraw over the years, which kind of created some tension there.
He's gotten so much better. He doesn't do this as much anymore, but he used to be so annoying. And he
was young back then.
And I didn't like Gino for a very long time. I actually just started liking Gino when we started recording this podcast last year. He started changing for me.
Yeah. So I do need to share a few details on some of the digs that he made over the years to shed light onto how this continued to form.
And Pat Summitt, just to provide some context, is like the most competitive person.
Yes.
She was a screamer. She was the ultimate old school coach.
Yeah, for sure. So in 1999, Pat Summitt was on a book tour, and on her tour, she visited Hartford, Connecticut, and Gino sent her flowers with a note inside that said, "Congratulations, I hope your next visit is not nearly so successful," meaning the next time they play at UConn. So whatever, that's not that big of a deal. It's pretty funny, but definitely a dig at Pat. And then in 2000, the Final Four was held in Philadelphia, which is Gino's hometown. Gino and Pat were both in the Final Four, Tennessee and UConn. And Gino Auriemma was asked about if anyone knows Philadelphia. Philadelphia is known for their cheesesteaks. And there's these two cheesesteak restaurants, Pat's and Gino's, and they're across the street from each other. And those two are a big rivalry. I've gone to both when I've been in Philly before. It's like you have to try both and compare. So Gino was asked about the two restaurants, obviously because Gino's and Pat's, Pat and Gino. And he said, Pat's is older and more dilapidated, and Gino's is bigger and brand new. And he said this publicly. So as you can imagine, at the time, Pat Summitt did not take this lightly. Either did her players, and either did Tennessee fans.
I love this because the digs now, like, this feels very light.
Yeah. But I think there was just so much tension between the teams already that these small digs at Tennessee over the years just really got to Pat. And Pat was a woman trying to keep her cool. She talks about she just tried to keep it cordial in public. Like she didn't want to create that side of things from her point of view.
Yeah. And to put this in more perspective, UConn was up in the series. So it doesn't feel always best when people punch down, right? It's not the best idea to punch down on people who you have won more games on. Like in comedy, it's encouraged to punch up. You can make fun of people who are better than you doing bigger things, but to punch down is always looked on as like a little
Yeah. So fast forward to the 2004 Final Four. Pat Summitt was asked what she would do if she came upon Gino Auriemma if his car was broken down on the side of the road. And she answered, well, I'd stop and ask him if I can help. Gino was asked a similar prompt, but the reverse, like if he were broken down and Pat came over, what would he do? And he laughed and said, I'd walk. So again, it seems like they're kind of jokes, but Pat Summitt took it personally, and it just continued on to be this
saga.
Yeah, it was just this ongoing kind of hatred towards the two teams. So in 2004, UConn beat Tennessee again in the national championship, and Gino knew that his digs were starting to affect Pat because she had stated something publicly. And after that win, he did go up to her and say something, and he later on put it in his book, Gino in Pursuit of Perfection. And it's quoted that he said, "Don't listen to all this crap you hear and read. Sometimes I just say things for fun. It's not meant to be at your expense. I have tremendous respect for what you've done, how you do it, and that will always be true."
That's what he said.
Yeah, but as the story is told, the tension kind of eased up a little bit from 2004 on. Fast forward to 2007. Everyone should know the name, the great Maya Moore. Maya Moore was between both Tennessee and UConn. And as most people will know, Maya Moore went to UConn to play basketball there. She is one of the best players of all time. Pat Summitt was pissed after Maya Moore went to UConn, and it turns out that she accused Gino of cheating at the time and not recruiting properly, but she did not share this publicly. Although she did not share it publicly, she did make a formal complaint to the NCAA, which I think is interesting, through the SEC. Turns out that UConn did self-report a violation for setting up a tour of ESPN studios for Maya Moore, but the NCAA never found any wrongdoing outside of that. But after all that happened in 2007, when it came time to sign a contract to continue to play UConn as an out-of-conference game, Pat Summitt would not sign it.
Yep.
She would not share publicly why. When was asked, why won't you continue to play UConn? All she said was, Gino knows. And when Gino was asked about it, he said, well, she hates my guts. So
there's so many layers to this. Like, to lose Maya Moore is heartbreaking.
Yes.
Especially now seeing how amazing she is. And Pat Summitt did feel that something shady happened in order to get her there.
And I mentioned earlier that Pat tried to keep things pretty cordial in the public eye and she wouldn't really give much. But later on, Gino did say publicly, well, she thinks I cheated and she just doesn't have the courage to say it publicly. But he knew why she was upset. Yeah. And a lot of people did not understand. That 2007 not signing led to a 13-year drought of the two teams facing each other. And the two teams have played since then, but the rivalry is just not the same. Tennessee, after Pat Summitt had passed away and stopped coaching, has not been the same team that they used to be. They kind of fell off the mark. They've gone through a few coaches. This is Kim Caldwell's first year as coach. We've said many times she's doing a hell of a job. Gino made a comment that she's doing a great job. And with the two teams playing this week, I will say there has been a lot of media leading up to the game. And people have been asking Paige Beckers what she thinks of the rivalry, has been asking Gino what he thinks of the rivalry. For Paige, she's the oldest one on that court. She's 23 right now. She was only 5 years old in 2007. So that makes sense that she's not really in the know. Like, she knows because she talks to alumni and alumni still make a big deal of it, but it's not what it was. Gino was asked about it during a press conference last week, and he said it became something that wasn't normal. He said, it just became stupid and became something I didn't want to be a part of anymore. I think our fans are stupid. I think their fans are stupid. And how they reacted to the whole thing, it just became something other than a basketball game. And after a while, it just got old.
Yeah, and I get that. We see that now. It is fun to have a storyline and to have teams with animosity towards each other. But then we see things like fans can take it to a whole nother level where then really nasty things come in, and then there's like racism involved and violence. And we see that between teams too, of if two teams playing gets too heightened, then there can be physical altercations, which nobody wants to see. So I get why he said that. And maybe this kind of depressurization that's happened over the last however many years has been good, and now they can bring it back in a new way. But you do look to your leadership to kind of increase the pressure or decrease the pressure when going into these games.
Yeah. And it's never going to be what it was because Pat Summitt is no longer. She is what made that team what it was, and them together is what made that rivalry what it was. So it will never be what it was, but it is nice to see Tennessee have this win and bring back that fierceness to it. I will say, doing some research for this deep dive, I knew what this rivalry was and the intensity of it, but I had to go back and remind myself because it has been a long time since it was what it was. But one thing I will say is it was really fun watching some clips of those old games and seeing some of the greats from both teams face each other. And you can tell in these videos how intense it was. And it makes me think of all the people who say, oh, women's sports is just getting exciting. Like, women's basketball is just getting popular. And it's like, just because you were not watching it doesn't mean it wasn't exciting.
Yeah.
And I just get so fired up because I'm like, no, I have been watching this for so long and I've been trying to share with people how exciting it is. Like, yes, I'm happy. Welcome to the party. But stop saying it's just getting exciting now because nothing boils my blood more than that.
And let's call it out. You're talking about when you hear it from men.
Exactly. And I'm just like, stop saying that. Like,
It just got exciting. Like, no, you just started watching.
You just started watching and realizing that it's exciting. I will not go on and talk about this because I'm sweating starting to think about it. But it just, I've known this, and watching those videos, it's just a reminder of like, what are people talking about? Just go watch highlights of those two teams play back in the day and tell me you don't think that was exciting, because I really just cannot.
Yeah. You were watching highlights today and you were whooping and yelling and telling me that I should be watching this too. I saw it live in action.
Yes. All right. So moving on to Thursday night's game with Tennessee beating UConn. Going into this game, UConn was on an 11-game winning streak. And none of those games were close. A lot of them were over 20-point wins.
Their conference sucks.
Yeah. And you know what? I think that hurts them in a lot of areas because we've talked about Tennessee all year. They're on the cusp of being a really good team. They just have to beat a top-ranked team, and they just haven't been able to do it. Being in those close games, you learn so much in every single one of those games. Of course, UConn over the years has been in those close games, but when you go 11 games straight and you're just blowing teams out, you get comfortable with that. I'm sure they practice it, but you don't have that fire under you and understand what to do in those tight situations. For Tennessee, they this year have lost 4 games to top 10 teams. All those games, they lost by 7 points or less. They've been right there. So this is the first top 10 team of the season that they beat.
And they beat a top 5 team.
Yes. They scored 80 points this game. That is the most points that the Huskies have led up to a single team all season. The Huskies are 21-3. They have not given up that many points all season. Additionally, the Lady Vols out-rebounded UConn, the Huskies, 46-34. That is a lot of rebounds. And they shot 61.5% from the field in the fourth quarter to help them win this game. Another thing that hurt UConn is Tennessee held Paige Beckers 5 of 16 of shooting from the field.
That's a rough
day.
Night.
And Paige typically shoots over 50% from the field, and now she's brought down to around 30%. That's a huge loss on UConn's part, and that just really highlights Tennessee's defense in this game. Thought it was really cool as well. This kind of goes back to the history of the rivalry. This is the most Tennessee alumni that were in the stands of a game in a season outside of their alumni weekend. So yes, for alumni weekend, a lot of alumni come back, but for this game specifically, a bunch of players came back. To name a few: Michelle Marciniak, Alexis Hornbuckle, Glory Johnson, Lisa McGill, Megan Simmons, Isabel Harrison, and Kelly Kane. And that's just to name a few. There were other alumni there as well. So this game was close, back and forth the entire time. It included 6 lead changes and 7 ties throughout the game.
We were watching this out with our friend Lex, and they didn't have the sound on for the game. We were eating dinner, and I was looking up, and UConn was winning, and then I would eat, and I would look up again, and then Tennessee was winning. Yep. I was like, hold on, how did that happen? Just kept going back and forth.
I was watching the highlights, and the sound in that arena was like nothing else.
Was it at Tennessee?
At Tennessee. Absolutely electric. Packed arena. So at halftime, the Lady Vols trailed by 2. The score was 39-37. And then UConn came out strong in the third quarter to go up by 6. But Tennessee was not letting up. With just over 2 minutes to go, the teams were tied at 74 points. And Tennessee quickly went up by 4 with a layup from Samara Spencer and 2 free throws from Talasia Cooper, with just over 1 minute of play. With 12 seconds to go, Tennessee was up 80-76 after Talasia Cooper found Z Spearman inside for a layup. With the final few seconds, UConn was scrambling. They got a few shots up. None of them were able to fall. And that's when time expired, finishing 80-76. The arena erupted.
I wanted them to storm the court.
I know. I kind of wish they did. The cheerleaders jumped on the court. The Tennessee players were jumping up and down. A few of the players, including senior Samara Spencer, ran over to Kim Caldwell, gave her a big hug. One thing I read was this team really respects Kim Caldwell. One, they were quoted saying they notice all the sacrifices she's been giving up. Hello, she just had her son literally less than 2 weeks ago and has only missed one game this season and is there showing up for their team. Another thing that they said was at the start of the season, when you come in, you think, oh, this is a rebuilding year. Like, I need to build up my team. She said to her players, we're going to make this year something special. Like, we're not waiting. I want this year to be something special. And that really hit home with the seniors, and you could just see the relationship they have with her. And I think that's really cool. That builds so much trust. Yeah.
Because I know when a new coach comes in, I had it happen at South Carolina. You're like, I'm not their recruit. I might not be part of what they have in mind. And it can be really, really scary for players, especially seniors who are like, I've got one more year left and I want this to work, but I don't know if I'm going to be part of their plan.
And the other thing that's interesting with Kim Caldwell is since Pat Summitt, she's the first coach who has had no ties to Tennessee. You had Holly Warlick, who was Coach Pat Summitt's longtime assistant, who stepped up. Then you had Kelly Harper, who was a former Tennessee player. Now they hire Kim Caldwell, and a lot of people were shocked by this because she had no ties to Tennessee going into this, which is very interesting to me. But look at what she's doing with this team.
If anyone knows what happened with Kelly Harper, I need that inside tea. She took them to an SEC championship last year and then got let go. Something, I'm speculating again here, something happened behind the scenes that we don't know about, because I thought that was wild. Either that or they had their eyes on Kim Caldwell and really just wanted to bring her in. I have no idea.
I don't know. And some of these players are transfers in, so they weren't in with Kelly Harper, the ones that have been quoted talking so highly about Kim. But I wonder, maybe the players, there was something going on there. I have no idea.
Yeah, we're totally speculating. We have no idea. But I was really surprised by that firing. I was like, whoa, that is ruthless.
I agree. But to see what Kim Caldwell's done, I'm like, obviously they made a good decision. I don't know what Kelly Harper would have done, but
Camila Cardoso fired Kelly Harper is actually what happened.
I made a joke about that the other day.
Camila Cardoso got her fired. That 3-point in the SEC championship at the buzzer is
with no one on her.
Oh my God. With Rakia Jackson just sitting there looking at Camila Cardoso take the 3.
Well, to wrap this up, UConn was led by freshman Sarah Strong, who shot 8 for 13 from the field and ended with 18 points, 9 rebounds. Tennessee actually had 4 players in double digits, but was led by junior forward Z Spearman, who had 16.7 rebounds, and senior guard Samara Spencer, who had 14 points.
At the end of last year, I said UConn is going to be in the Final Four. No doubt about it. And at the beginning of this year, I said they're in my Final Four. They're not in my Final Four. After watching how this game went down, and that might be very short-sighted, and this might be recency bias of them just having a bad game, but I was like, oh, I don't know.
And we said it last year, and they still made it to the Final Four. So who knows?
True. So true. It also depends on how the brackets come out.
Yes. Question for you. If Notre Dame and South Carolina both are in it, and you know I love South Carolina.
Oh, we're getting a divorce.
But if we
are divorced for one weekend, we will reconnect.
No, you didn't even let me finish my question. If I choose to wear Notre Dame gear, because historically, before I met you, and after my Tennessee affair broke up with Pat Summitt and all that, Notre Dame became my team. What are you going to do if I show up wearing Notre Dame gear and root for them?
You don't exist for that day. No, I'm just kidding. There will be no touching. There will be limited interaction.
I am a big South Carolina fan, but if it comes down to Notre Dame, South Carolina, I have to go Notre Dame.
Yeah, and I won't talk to you.
Okay.
And it'll be fine. And then we will reconvene after South Carolina wins, and I can brag in your face. Then we'll be totally cool.
Oh my gosh. To our listeners, do you see what I deal with every day?
And I'm totally kidding if that's not very clear to everyone.
All right. With that, let's talk about what we're looking forward to this week. I will go first with the Unrivaled one-on-one tournament. Wraps up Friday, February 14th. Happy Valentine's Day. Beginning at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Carolyn. Now, at the time of recording, this has not started yet.
Yes. So we're really taking our chances.
Hopefully our predictions aren't already out by the time our episode releases. Who do you have winning the whole one-on-one tournament?
I have my loyalties to South Carolina. I have my loyalties to someone who has proven that they can win under pressure. And I have my loyalties to someone who has talked about the $200,000 that they could win in this. And I think it's a huge incentive for them to do that. And for that reason, I'm going Alicia Gray.
She's a great player. She's been fun to watch. She won the skills competition at the WNBA last year.
She won both the skills challenge and the 3-point competition. So like I said, she knows how to win in these situations. She's very inspired by winning a lot of money. And I live for Alicia Gray content. I love her Southern accent. Like I've never loved an accent before. And she's cute and giggly. And I just need her to win just so that I can get more content from her. Who do you have?
So also staying loyal to my team, Notre Dame, Arike Ogunbowale. As a reminder, we were at the Women's Final Four back in 2018 when Arike hit 2 back-to-back buzzer beaters to win the national championship and to beat UConn in the Final Four. I replay that video in my head all the time of the announcer. Score! Arike Ogunbowale does it again. So that's what I'm envisioning for this one-on-one tournament.
Wow.
I think something that will hinder her is if she's up next to a larger guard. She's not that tall. So I think a bigger guard like Nafisa Collier or like Brianna Stewart could give her some trouble down low. But Arike's one-on-one and her handles and her ability to shoot the ball under pressure from deep. If she's having a good day, no one's stopping her. We talked about, didn't go to the Olympics this year, and at the WNBA All-Star game, when it was the Olympic team versus the WNBA team, she went off.
She does thrive.
She thrives in those situations. And I know other players are playing really well in this 3-on-3 right now, but that's my gut. That's who I think is going to take it all.
All right, we'll see.
What are you looking forward to this week?
Softball's back.
It is.
It's so exciting. And the Clearwater Invitational is here. I've talked about the Clearwater Invitational before. I love it because some of the best teams are already playing very early in the season and the weather's beautiful there. And it's just like a day filled with softball. I want to go really bad one year. On Friday, February 14th at 3 p.m. Eastern time, number 4 Oklahoma State takes on number 6 UCLA. There are games on all weekend related to the Clearwater Invitational and every other tournament that's happening in softball. So there's going to be a lot of great softball happening this week and weekend. So tune in. That is it for this week. We will see you next week on Women's Sports Weekly. In the meantime, watch women's sports, rate and subscribe to the pod on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. Share the podcast with your friends. Keep sending us topics you want us to cover on Instagram at Women's Sports Weekly Pod. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.